Year for 2022. So here we are to talk with him about his philosophy on winemaking, his future goals, and all that. So,
sounds great.
All right.
Nice to see you, Stan.
Good to see you, Keith.
Yeah. Appreciate it.
Thanks for doing this.
Oh, you bet. Thanks for having me.
So, I think my first question is to you: is did you, when you first broke ground here 30 years ago? This is your 30-year anniversary, right?
Correct. We purchased property 30 years ago. Started developing 29.
Okay.
Yep.
Did you take a formal winemaking class, or was it just
so my
geology?
background is I finished a business degree when I was really, really young, and then didn't know what I wanted to do. My father was a business professor, and he thought I should teach, and I was like, no, I don't think I want to do that. So I transferred to UC Davis to get my master's in geology. Okay. But I had a lot of free time because I hadn't taken a science class yet. They actually accepted me. Now I think they just laugh at you. But so they accepted me into the program, but I couldn't really do a whole lot with my master's. So I loved wine, so I went ahead and finished a degree in fermentation science and minor in vit while I worked on my geology master's.
Yeah. Okay.
And so enjoyed that, loved what I did, and then I went off to be a consulting geologist for about 10 years.
So what does a consulting geologist do?
I did mostly slope stability work, so siting big things like transmission lines, dams, bridges, highways, things like that, all around the world.
Okay.
And so that was kind of, I went to mines, but not to find the mineral, but to tell them how to get it out, kind of thing. And so I enjoyed it. I had a great time doing that.
Cool.
It was great right up until I got married.
Yeah.
My wife was a little less enamored with the whole
Traveling.
international travel aspect,
Yeah.
because I think shortly after we were married, I went to South America, and I said, I should be back in about 10 days, 2 weeks, something like that. And I came back about 8 weeks later, and she said, we need to have a chat. That never goes well, just saying. After being married for 32 years, that never heads well. So anyway,
so you started thinking about other options.
Yeah, we started and looked at other options, and so I started working on a couple of business plans. One of the trips I had taken in geology was to the Tongan Islands, and I loved it. I spent 6 months in Tonga, had a great time, stayed with the Tongan Kings as I sited some power transmission lines there. And so when I left, they offered me the chance to come back and start a business in Tonga. Which is quite a nice honor. Generally all their businesses are 51% Tongan owned. And so my first idea was, well, let's do sailboat chartering. I used to sail competitively when I was younger, and so I thought, well, sailboat chartering in the South Pacific, that could be just awesome. That'd be a great deal. And the other idea was a winery vineyard. My parents were very enamored with wine. I'd grown up just outside of Napa, and so my father had helped a lot of wineries get started in the 60s and early 70s. He even wrote Bob Mondavi's business plan when Bob got started.
Oh, that's right. I remember
and
that.
So he helped a lot of wineries, kind of get their business ideas formalized. Now, keep in mind, he was an educator, so he didn't have any money, but he would help, get their ideas coordinated and help connect them with financing and that sort of thing. And he loved wine. And so I got drug around to wineries from the time I was really young, had an appreciation for wine.
You told me they bought wine for you.
Yeah, I would actually
save until.
Yeah, I started a wine collection when I was about 4. Because I convinced my parents if I was going to give up my Saturdays and go wine tasting with them, that I ought to get to collect wine too.
Yeah.
And so they bought into that. So I was like, okay, so I basically just bought whatever my father bought. But I got to where I collected a lot of first vintages, which was kind of fun. Right. That was a fun project.
How many wines did you have by the time you were 21?
I had about 1,000 bottles.
Wow.
And so
that's crazy.
Yeah. So
do you still have any of them?
I still have a few.
Yeah.
I still have a few. My father and I typically are opening some bottles out of the 60s still that have been recorked and are doing well.
Oh, good.
And so every now and then we'll pop one of those. And
have you had one that that blew your mind in the last 10 years?
Let's see. Blew my mind in the last 10 years. Probably some of the old, the wines out of the old Ingleduck facility have held up extremely well. So things out of the mid-60s out of that facility. Now those are,
I've heard good things about Ingleduck.
Right about the time that I first started collecting wine, right in that area.
Wow.
And so those have held up really well and are pretty spectacular.
That's amazing.
A lot of the wines that I collected, I sold when I was in college, because I would sell a bottle or two a month to pay for all the fun, in college. Because when I was buying these bottles, an expensive bottle was $150. I don't mean $150. I mean $1.50. So that was an expensive bottle of Cabernet in the '60s. And so when I sold them, I didn't sell anything for less than $500 a bottle.
Wow.
And so,
well, you're destined for success.
A lot of it was, first vintages. Nobody libraries enough of their first vintage, and most of the wines went back to the wineries that sold it to us.
Okay.
Because they wanted something back in their library.
That's cool.
Yeah, and they were willing to pay. They knew they were in my dad's cellar, so they were comfortable with where the wines had been and everything.
So your passion for wine, eventually, about 30 years ago, you said, I'm going to start a winery.
Yeah. So I was working on these two business plans, and then my wife, we had people over for dinner late one night, and this is like third bottle in late in the evening or something, and she asked, how those business plans were coming along, and I got pretty animated with the whole sailing side, talked with my hands a lot, pretty excited about it and all that, about what we could do and how it'd be a lot of fun and all that. And then she asked that kind of fatal question of what would she do on the boat. And I'm a little bit of a smart ass, and so I just kind of popped off and said, well, cook and clean, what else? Oh, it didn't go well. It didn't go well at all. And so kind of torpedoed the whole boat idea. So I had to do a much better presentation on the Winery Of The Year concept. So nice bottle of wine, nice candlelight dinner, and almost 30 years later, here we are.
Yeah, and you said you were sort of looking at California.
Yeah, I was. I had looked in Washington, and we were living in Redmond at the time. And so I looked in Washington a bit. And at that time in Washington, keep in mind 33 years ago or 32 years ago, something like that, most of the wines were being grown on diversified farms. So somebody that was growing cherries and apples also had some wine grapes out back somewhere. Okay. And they were kind of neglected and not getting a lot of attention for the most part. That was kind of the state of the industry at that point in time. It was just getting going. In Washington, that was really, things were just getting going, right? And so it was hard to get behind where you could market grapes when, how can you, market, oh, it's just such a wonderful site when it's alfalfa across the street, apples next to it, cherries behind it. Right. Just really hard to do that. So that's kind of where Washington was at the time. And I made it to most of the areas in Washington. I hadn't made it to Red Mountain at that point. And I went down, and we could have done something close to home in Napa. It would have been pretty small. Mm-hmm. Prices were pretty expensive at that time, even then, and so it would have been a much smaller operation, which would have been okay. But I went down, and I love the Paso Robles area, so I went down and put a deal together for a piece of property on the west side of Paso, so the cooler side of Paso, and then I came back up. I didn't fly home. I flew here. I flew into the Tri-Cities because the Red Mountain, and there was one other region that I hadn't had time to really look at. So it's like, okay, I told Renee, I said, well, I think we got the deal put together in California. I'm going to fly into the Tri-Cities and just make sure there's nothing we're missing. And but get packed, ready to go. You're going to become a Californian. That's kind of where we were headed, right? And so came here and went around Red Mountain. First afternoon, I flew in and got in early afternoon, went around and went wine tasting. And I'd just been doing the same thing in Paso Robles. And so when I came up here and was wine tasting, the wines were kind of rustic, I would say. Would be a kind of a proper description, maybe, just overall with where things sat. It's like there wasn't as much polish as I was used to. Cayona was here, and there were a few others that were here at the time. And so I went around to all those, and then I had the opportunity to talk with some of the owners of the facilities, and I was invited out the next day. They said, well, come out the next day. It was right at harvest. Come out the next day and see what's going on and taste a few grapes with us and that sort of thing. So I did that. I came out the next morning and started tasting grapes, and it's like, well, there's a huge disconnect here. The grapes are absolutely fantastic. I hadn't tasted very many wines that were really showing that, but the grapes were spectacular. And so then I spent the next day and a half or so really diving in and tasting barrels and, kind of trying to get my hands on what's going on. And so by the time I left, I put together a deal to buy the first piece of property here and turned off the deal at Paso Robles all over a kind of wild 4 or 5 day stretch. So
that's pretty cool. Now this is kind of a remote area. You must have and a little bit of culture shock.
Yeah, so for actually, it worked out pretty well for us. My wife Renee is from a small town in Wyoming called Big Piney, which is a town of about 500.
Yeah.
And it's kind of sagebrush with mountains around. And so, for moving over here, this was still like big city for her almost.
Okay.
And so, and for me, I like being, out, so it wasn't that big of a culture shock.
Okay.
I still flew a lot for wine, especially in the first 15 years or so, a lot through different states and that
Right.
sort of thing. So I would be traveling a fair amount. So it worked out really well.
Good. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
So let's say 30 years ago, when you started breaking ground, 29 years ago, and you look at your facility now, which is beautiful, did you kind of foresee that? Is that something? No.
No, we anticipated being a lot smaller operation.
Yeah.
The idea was to keep it a little smaller.
What was your original case production goal?
We thought we would see the winery at about 4,000 or 5,000 cases, and that would be a real comfortable number.
Sure.
Comfortable number to support us and have a good quality of life and be able to have fun making the wines and that sort of thing. We blew by that number the first couple of years.
Yeah.
And so.
What is your production now?
Strong. About 50,000.
50,000. Yeah, that's a solid number.
Yeah. 50,000 under branded products, and we also produce some other things as well.
Right.
And so
you want to stay there?
It's a comfortable size. I don't think in business you ever stand still. I think you're moving one direction or the other,
Sure.
right? And so there's probably always a little bit of growth. We've got more property to plant, that sort of thing.
Right.
So we're continuing to look at new clones, new varietals, or additional amounts that we need of certain things, and planting a little bit almost every year.
Okay.
And so I see things continuing to grow. I don't see us going to. The goal isn't to hit 100,000 or something like that. I mean, I think I'd like to keep it under that 75 number.
Sure.
Because I think there's a whole lot of things you need after you hit 75,000. That once you hit about 75,000, you really need to go to about 150 to 200,000 pretty quickly.
That's a big number.
Yeah, that's a big number. Yeah. And so, we're at the point of trying to decide. My oldest daughter just graduates from college this weekend, and so she just finished a degree in dual degrees in biology and chemistry, and she has to decide what she wants to do.
Chemistry's a good degree.
It is. So she's going to decide if she's interested in the wine industry. I think she'll spend a harvest here, and then probably go down and spend a harvest with some friends in Australia this winter. Yeah. And by that point, she should know whether she has a real interest in the industry or not.
That's a good idea.
And then kind of where we're going from there. That'll help Renee and I kind of figure out what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. You have a few years left in you, though.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so.
So what? Red Mountain's my favorite appellation in Washington. I know they get actually Yakima, Red Mountain, my favorite part of the Columbia Valley. What is it about Red Mountain that makes it so unique over, let's say, Walla Walla?
So there's kind of 5 factors, really that kind of factor into Red Mountain. For one, it sits in what I would call the banana belt in eastern Washington. So we're warmest in the summer, warmest in the winter. And that's typical. If you look at the best wine growing regions across the world, they've got a few things in common. One is they're typically warm. Mm-hmm. Another one is Red Mountain's on a southwest slope, so it's great exposure to the sun throughout the day.
Right.
That's pretty typical with a lot of other wine growing regions across the world. Another one is it's dry, and this isn't necessarily synonymous with all the wine growing regions across the world, but dry means you're able to control the moisture when you want it. Right. You never get moisture at the wrong time. We don't get rained on into harvest, so we have complete control of moisture application, basically. Yeah. We get about 6 inches of rainfall annually. It happens mostly in the winter months, and that's the total water count here for Red Mountain. So it's basically desert. It's dry. Natural vegetation is sagebrush and bunchgrass. So all the irrigation in eastern Washington is pretty much possible with irrigation projects.
Yes.
And so that gives you the control. Next one is it's windy, and this one doesn't get talked about very much, or the breezy conditions. The breezy conditions do a couple things for you. One, we lower our disease pressure.
Yes.
So we lower our mildew disease pressure, we lower other disease pressure as well. So basically, that helps that side of things. The other side of things is a windy condition will tend to thicken up the skins. The plant reacts to its environment to some extent. So given the windy conditions, it'll thicken the skins. Think of Sardinia.
Rhone Valley.
Yeah, Sardinia or the Rhone Valley or something like
yeah.
that. You know, which same thing, kind of.
Right.
And when you think about, we produce mostly red grapes here on the estate. So reds are, the color's entirely in the skin, and most of the flavor is associated with the skin. So if we have those thicker, more robust skins, immediately we've got thicker, more robust grapes. So those are kind of 4 common features that you could find in a lot of areas throughout the world that are premium wine growing areas, right? So the 5th feature for Red Mountain is the soil type.
Yeah.
And the soils are a combination of wind-blown sands and silts. We get from the Horsehaven Hills across the way here, we get some soil donated every year when the wind blows. And then interfingered with those are the Missoula-era flood deposits. And then you go, okay, so why do I care? Why does it matter, right? So you have to think about the flood deposits were rocks and materials that were eroded by glaciers and then dropped into a basin sitting about where Missoula, Montana is. And then ice would dam that basin containing about the volume of the Great Lakes in water. And that ice dam would break about every 100 years, and all that water would rush to the Pacific right through this area. And it would drain a volume equal to the Great Lakes in about 8 hours. And so, you've got water moving pretty slow to water moving really fast, but you got a lot of water. So, first of all, what's significant about the rocks? Well, if you think about the area the glaciers were in southern BC, western Montana, northern Idaho, eastern Washington, and eastern Oregon. So kind of that's the area that was glaciated. So those are all what we would consider the mining districts of the Northwest. That's where we mine for copper, gold, silver, platinum, and a whole bunch of other things. So you've got rocks that are high in minerality, and then we drop them into a basin. The waters are alkaline. So you know how you get the spots on the shower door or the sink or something from water hardness? Well, imagine that at where you've got rocks that are there for thousands to hundreds of thousands of years. They get a coating of calcium carbonate, pretty thick coating of calcium carbonate, and then we have these floods drop them off here at Red Mountain. Now, Red Mountain sat at a really interesting place in the floods. It was kind of the dividing line between water moving really fast and water moving pretty darn slow. And so if you go down to any stream or river today, find a rock that sticks out close to the shore, what happens? Water swirls around, right?
Yeah, so this is like the eddy of...
That's right. When the water swirls around, things fall out. So we had things deposited here, everything from the size of more commonly gravels to like fist size or basketball size cobbles. Every now and then a Buick, would drop out. And those were deposited here on Red Mountain. But they were very discontinuous. It wasn't like a continuous layer. It would be chopped up, quite a bit more. And so then you have to think about, okay, so where else in the world do we grow grapes on high carbonate, high mineral soils? Bordeaux and Burgundy come to mind. Okay, so their carbonate is from limestone. It's a different source, right? Different rock type, different source, but that high carbonate gives you an earthy or a meaty texture to the grapes you don't get without it. So we've got high minerality, high carbonate, and relatively poor soils. So they not a lot of organic materials, so the grapes have to kind of struggle to grow.
Yes.
And so all of those things kind of lead Red Mountain into that Grand Cru growing region for Washington. It is still, Washington's been growing grapes now for almost 50 years. It's still the best area to grow grapes we found in Washington, period. And it's not just the wineries and vineyards that'll say that. When everybody else is willing to pay 3 to 5 times the state average for grapes off of Red Mountain, then there's something going on here, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So a ton of Cabernet off Red Mountain's about 5,000. A ton of Cabernet across the hill here off of Horsehaven Hills is about a third of that. Okay. So just to give you an idea.
I knew you guys.
So
are you pretty equal to Walla Walla in the price of grapes?
Red Mountain's higher. Higher. Yep. Yeah. And Walla Walla is a charming area. I would say, to me, the best regions in Walla Walla haven't been planted to grapes yet because there's an inherent conflict with grapes and wheat. wheat growers spray an SU herbicide
Right.
that grapes hate.
Yeah.
And so there has to be some separation. I would say as the industry matures, there's the potential for some other areas to get planted there.
Blue Mountains
As that goes on. The other thing I'd say about Walla Walla is it's going to be, I think, a lot more like Western Oregon in a lot of ways.
Okay.
In that you will have much more variance from year to year. You need a warm year to get things right.
Right.
To really get,
Sure.
Cabernet, Cab Franc, things like that. To really get some of those later ripening varietals, you need the heat units and the warmth to really produce a spectacular vintage.
Yeah.
So out of 10, you're going to have one or two that really show well. You're going to have, 3 or 4 that are pretty good. You have 1 or 2 that aren't very good, and then you're going to have 1 or 2 train wrecks.
Yes.
Along the way. Where I think that's one of the things Red Mountain excels at is, we've got a lot of heat units.
Right.
So in a cool year, it just means we pick a little later.
Yeah.
But we're still within the window to get it off before you get into rain or bad conditions or something like
makes
that.
Makes perfect sense.
Where Walla Walla or like the northern end of the Yakima Valley, if they've got a cool year, they better have taken their crop size down. They better have done some things proactively to deal with that. Otherwise, they're going to have kind of challenges getting the harvest in. So I think those are some of the things that make Red Mountain exceptional.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So what do you feel about, now this I think is ridiculous, and you probably won't use the same terminology, but the debate about minerality, the debate about the grapes, showing the soil. You're a geologist, so...
I can tell you a funny story. So Randall Graham's a good friend of mine.
Yes.
And so I remember being...
That's right, you made some wine for him.
We did.
Yeah.
We made the Pacific Rim Riesling
That's
stuff.
right.
We started that off, and Critique of Pure Riesling, a number of other things for him when he got started with those. And so I was down at his winery in the old winery in Santa Cruz. And so we were down there one day, and assistant winemaker was with me as well. And Randall's staff were loading rocks into the fermenters. And I had to stop him, and I said, okay, what are you doing? And he said, well, this is a kind of experiment, blah, 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 and he's going on about that. And I said, okay, let's go to a whiteboard. Let me show you the chemistry, because what you're doing isn't going to work, and here's why. And so we went through, the technical side of it. And so we finished that conversation, and then pretty soon they're unloading the fermenters out of those rocks. And I think, minerality is one of the things that plays into overall terroir. It definitely is something that factors into it. It is not the end-all, be-all, and you can't, some people are wanting to, well, can we just extract and add? No, you can't do that. That's not really the way it works.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I see, so definitely, soil types that have certain components and whatnot definitely have those are positives. As far as the grapes, I would say you look at some of the research that Ann Noble and her team's doing at UC Davis right now, and one of the things about 15 years ago Ann set out to do, she really wanted to connect something in the soil with a flavor in the grapes.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the equation's more complicated than that.
Yeah.
And so it typically is never X equals Y. It's X plus 10 other things equals Y plus 5 other things.
Right.
And so that's what they found in that research, is just going on, that the equation is so much more complex than they thought. That they're starting to unravel small pieces of that, but they haven't got a magic elixir to spray on a soil to change flavors or something like that. And I don't see that really getting there.
And the only guy that can really change a flavor is the winemaker. If he puts too much oak on it, or
I think the winemaker's job is to shepherd what the vineyard gave them. To some extent.
Some don't do that.
Yeah, so you can put a bigger fingerprint on it. I'd say Chardonnay is a great example, right? So Chardonnay, you can give 10 winemakers the same set of grapes, right? And you will have probably 10 relatively different wines, most likely, because that, I think, is the wine that probably has the biggest winemaker fingerprint on it of any, is Chardonnay. And so in the reds, we take a little different approach. I mean, we try to make the wines in the vineyard, You know, so basically we're not going to create the concentration and flavors we want in the winery. We do that in the vineyard. We just try not to screw it up in the winery on the way through.
Yeah.
And so, you know, in the winery, the side of it is to polish that, you know, to add nuance to it, polish it, things like that. You know, the oak's job is to support the fruit, not the other way around.
Yeah.
Not looking for the oak to dominate.
Like the chef putting spices in the food to make them.
That's a great analogy. That's the analogy I use all the time, is the barrels are the winemaker's spice racks. So are different yeast types and fermentation, different fermentation techniques.
Yeah.
You know, you've got all those nuances you can play with. And it's kind of like, you know, kind of like the chef. You know, you're not going to take a piece of chicken and make it taste like filet mignon. We're not going to take Merlot and make it taste like Syrah. That's not the goal.
Right.
The goal is to kind of figure out, okay, what can we do to support those flavors in that Merlot?
Yeah, exactly. So when you were originally approaching winemaking, I always ask this question of winemakers because I'm really interested in that, where you decide how you're going to make the wine artistically versus the bottom line in your checkbook. Like, there's some winemakers, you know,
That's a great question.
They're really eclectic and their wines aren't commercially viable.
Okay.
Where do you, in your thought process, well, you know, I don't want to get too weird because I won't sell my wine.
Right. So I will say that we approach things from a wine that we want to drink. And so, you know, to start with, I grew up in a time that California was making wines that were really well balanced. And then they went off kind of, I would say, the deep end, the over-extracted end, you know, chasing Parker and others, you know, down a rabbit hole of these really high alcohol, highly extracted, best on release, and then a downhill slide after that kind of wines. And that wasn't my thing at all. I grew up drinking a lot of European wines with a lot of California wines that were made in the 60s and early 70s, and those were made with a lot of restraint. They had a higher acid balance. They aged really well. They were better at 10 years than they were on release. They were better at 20 than they were at 10. You know, that style of wine, and that's the style that I like, and so that's kind of what we made, which gives you some challenges on the commercial side. Because I would say commercially right now, you see most wines are bottled 18 months after they're fermented.
Yes.
That's pretty typical, and then sold 2 months after that. Okay, that's kind of a typical formula right now. I would say on West Coast winemaking style, right?
Less than 2 years.
Yeah, and less than 2 years from harvest to sale, right? And so we took a different approach. Now it's more expensive. And it's a little painful at the very beginning, but once you're into the cycle, it's really not that big of a deal. And so I like a little bit longer in the bottle. We're in the bottle for, you know, 22, maybe as much as 28 months in certain wines, but 22 is probably a good average number. Some things maybe as short as 20, but typically a few months longer than typical. The next part is that once we get in the blending process and bottle, I want a year of bottle age. On the Signature Series wines for sure, and as close to a year as I can get on the Arch Terrace wines. And so that year of bottle age means that you're going to be selling different vintages. So the current vintage in Terra Blanca Signature Series Cabernet is 2017.
Okay.
The 18 won't release until this fall. And so, you know, like I said, once you get into that cycle of doing that, it's not that big of a deal, but it allows me to make a wine style that I want to make and still have the wine show the way I want it to show when we're selling it.
Perfect.
You know, and so yeah, it's a compromise to some extent because you make more money if you did it differently, right?
In the beginning.
Yeah, and I think to extent even now, there's a certain cost in holding things, right?
Yeah.
You know, it takes space and time and
Yeah,
you know
that's true.
all of that.
Yeah.
So there's a cost to that, but I think it's worthwhile.
Yeah.
You know, there are some wines that hold a lot longer. There are a few wines, you know, that don't make it out of the winery really, but there's some things, the Italian varietals that we make, which is kind of more, you know, we make smaller quantities. I think Italians are fun in Washington. I'm not sure, you know, that they have the legs to carry them all across the nation.
Yeah.
I would say, you know, Italy makes some great wines at some very good price points.
Yeah.
And so hard to give a restaurant in New York or North Carolina mountains enough excuses on why they should put a Terra Blanca Italian varietal on their list. I can give them lots of reasons why they'd have a Shiraz, Merlot, Cabernet, a blend from us, but giving them enough reasons to put an Italian varietal. Yeah, exactly. So we make those in small quantities and keep them here. But I like 4 or 5 years in the bottle on those wines. And so
Sangio from Washington can age pretty good.
Yeah, we like the way those wines are higher acid balance to start with, and we like the way they show at that 4 or 5 year period. So we hold those wines for a long time.
Yeah,
you know,
makes perfect sense.
You know, there's another project that we do, which when I started, we brought cuttings out of the Tocolon vineyard out of California. Bob Mondavi helped us with that, and we brought those up and planted those here on Red Mountain, and back about, I guess a little over 12 years ago, we started bottling some of those separately, or working towards bottling some of those separately. So there's another label called JT Gray, which is kind of a higher end project. So we do just a Cabernet and a Syrah under that, and so those wines
Why
are
JT
things.
Gray?
JT Gray is, I got drug around for wine by 3 people. My parents, obviously, and then I had an aunt that would visit from North Carolina, and my parents were under the impression that she loved wine, and actually she didn't like wine at all. She loved going up the valley and seeing the pretty buildings, and Napa was really, you know, it's a tight, small valley, trees, and very pretty, you know, older buildings and things like that. She loved doing that. But what she would do wine tasting is she'd take her glass, she'd smell it, and she'd hand it to a 5-year-old, and I'd down it and hand it back to her. And so my parents always wanted to go wine tasting when she came out, because apparently I was really well behaved. Otherwise, I was kind of a little hellion, apparently, you know, on these trips. So when she went along, I was really well behaved. Slept a lot, apparently, too. And so when I got in the wine business, I was back visiting her in North Carolina. She said, well, you know why you like wine so much, don't you? I said, well, yeah, I kind of grew up with it, you know, and all that. And she said, no, I started giving you wine when you were about 3. What are you talking about? So you remember all those trips? Yeah. I never drank the wine. You did. Oh, really? Have you told your brother that? She said, no, don't you dare. Until I die. No way.
Oh, that's crazy.
So, yeah.
The good old days, right?
So 3 middle names, Jane, Thaddeus, and Gray.
Okay.
So my mother, my father, and my aunt.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Good. Now, when in your process of your winery did you start coming out with Onyx?
So Onyx, when we, the first vintage off the estate that we kept for wines here was 97. So we planted in 93, and the first vintage we hung on to for our wines was 97. We made stuff from it from early on in those years, but the vines were pretty young. And so 97 was the first year, and that's the first year we made a little bit of Onyx.
Oh, right off the bat.
Yeah, right off the bat.
Okay.
Yep. So,
that's cool.
So we were looking for a Bordeaux style blend. You know, it's probably going to be Cab dominant, but it varies, and so it has all 5 Bordeaux in it. You know, Cab Merlot, Cab Franc, Petit Verdot, Malbec. We do grow Carmenere, but Carmenere's never made it into the line. And so you know,
what do you
the
do with
blend
your
changes.
Carmenere?
We typically, a lot of times I'll sell it to somebody, you know, small quantities or something like that. I've never released a Carmenere. So.
Have you ever played with Nebbiolo, since you like Italian?
We do. We do. I'll let you taste one.
Okay.
We have Nebbiolo. We blend a little bit of Cabernet in that, and the wine's called Pantheon.
Okay.
So there's a few wines.
Do you grow that out here?
We do.
Okay.
We do.
And it does well.
It does well. Yeah, Nebbiolo is kind of a pain in the ass. It grows like a weed.
Does
and
it? So you have to crop it back.
It's very twiggy. Oh yeah, we crop it back, and it's planted in tight spacing so we can get some root competition and slow it down. And
yeah, they do some good Nebbiolo down in the gorge too.
They do.
And what is that winery? That Cane's Table or Cane?
Okay.
Yeah. I can't remember the name of it. I'm having trouble. My mind isn't clicking as well as it usually does. When did you introduce the
Signature Series? So the Signature Series, we waited until the vines had a little bit of age on them. And so the first, initially the wines were called Reserve, and then the label changed to Signature Series. So the first Reserve wines were with the 01 vintage. Okay. And then the Signature Series, that labeling came out in 06.
Okay. And then the Arch Terrace?
Arch Terrace, that was initially a slightly different label. It just morphed into the Arch Terrace label. That was kind of the estate level wines.
Sure.
And so the Arch Terrace label released in about, I want to say 05 or so is when we made a label change. And it went through a little bit of evolution there as it evolved over the first 4 or 5 years. And the last 4 or 5 years has been similar labeled. It looks similar with the arches on the front,
Sure.
that sort of thing, the artwork. Yeah.
And just for you guys that are watching, this is the one where I think if you really want to see Keith's talents and not have to spend a bunch of cash, this is like $17
Yeah,
retail.
so the Arch Terrace wines are a great value. You know, I mean, I think one of the advantages of us buying on Red Mountain early is that I can produce a wine like that.
Yeah, you own the vineyard.
I can make something at pretty much whatever price point within reason that I'm willing to. Because I'm not having to pay $5,000 a ton for the fruit.
Right.
You know, we're growing it, and we've got a lower cost of acquisition of the property when we started. You know, property values are 150 times higher than they were when we started.
Oh wow!
To give you an idea of where things are at. You know, so it's changed a bit.
Yeah.
You know,
and there's no more land left on Red Mountain, is there?
pretty much. There's a few, you know, a few things come up for sale every now and then.
Yeah.
So.
And then people jump on it, like Mike Corliss.
Typically, typically there's, you know, a lot of interest. You know,
How many acres do you have here?
We've got about 175 acres here.
You're in good shape.
So we're in good shape. Yeah, we've got plenty to keep us out of trouble.
Well, I really appreciate your wines and the Signature Series. This is what we have here. Is the which one do
Signature
we have?
Series Cab. So this is the 2017 Signature Series Cab.
Now, there's something about the aromatics on a Red Mountain wine that are very unique to anywhere else in the state that I noticed. And has to be terroir.
So it is. So there's a couple of descriptors that I would tell people to look for. If you drink a fair amount of Red Mountain wines, look for like a kind of a hint of Grand Marnier, that candied orange.
Okay.
There's a little bit of hint of that. That's one of the things from those high carbonate soils, I think. High carbonate, high mineral soils are giving us that little hint of Grand Marnier. And then there's just a density to the wines off of Red Mountain that's not common in the state necessarily. So a little more concentration and depth, density-wise, you know, so there's just a weight and a little bit of chalkiness on the palate. So there's a little hint of chalkiness. So those are the three things. You connect those three together, and I think you can pick out most Red Mountain wines as long as they aren't kind of pounded with too much new oak.
So a little candied orange, more structure, and the third one was...
A little bit of chalkiness.
Chalkiness,
A little bit of chalkiness. So those are the three things. I mean, the fruit flavors are different for different varietals, you know, but those are the three things that I kind of look for.
Yeah, and maybe it's that kind of Grand Marnier thing that really stands out to me, and that I always kind of described it as the Red Mountain soil.
Yeah,
you know,
that's the first one I'm looking for. Yeah, if I'm looking to identify Red Mountain wines blind, that'll be the first thing that I'll be looking for is that little hint of Grand Marnier.
And that could be ruined by overuse of oak.
It certainly could. Yeah, I wouldn't say ruined, but I'd just say masked.
Yeah, masked.
You can cover it up, right? Yeah,
that would be ruined.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I'm not a huge.
I know you're.
You know, new oak fan. I use a fair amount of new oak, but we use it carefully.
Yeah,
you know,
it doesn't
how
dominate
we want it.
the wine.
No, I always want the fruit. The oak is there to support the fruit, not the other way around.
Right.
You know, Renee, my wife, wishes I loved American oak barrels because they're about, you know, a third of the cost or 25% of the cost of French oak barrels. And I'll buy about one American oak barrel about every other year just to remind me that's not it. And I buy about 500 French oak barrels a year. And so,
well, you got to get past that kind of dill pickle thing that the American oak gives to so many wines.
I think American oak does have a place in winemaking.
Sure.
If you're wanting to make a red wine and you want to release that wine within a year of when you made it, American oak's probably an essential component to allow you to do that. You know, so allowing you that quicker release side of things.
Sure.
I do think it shortens the longevity.
Okay.
I think it mutes some of the nuances to some extent, especially heavier use of it.
Right.
But I think if you're trying to get something that's more forward and out quickly, I think it's essential. So it really just depends what you're trying to do, you know. Keep in mind, if you find a wine and it's selling for less than about $20, $25 a bottle, it probably doesn't get to visit a French oak barrel. You know, if you find a wine and it's less than about $8 a bottle, it never gets to visit any barrel. So there are some economics involved.
Sure.
You know, when you look at that, because you look at the cost of an oak barrel. Let's see, my average cost this year is about almost $1,500 a barrel.
gone up to $1,500.
Almost 50. We're buying high-end barrels.
Yeah.
And so almost 1,500 a barrel. I think I'm going to get a little bit of a discount because the euro keeps tanking. So, So I typically buy it.
Do you hide that bill from Renee?
She's the accountant, so she's ultimately going to get involved. But yeah, it's a large bill.
Yeah.
It's a large part of winemaking.
And
so a lot of times
you use neutral French oak for these guys.
I use about a third new oak in the Arch Terrace wines.
You do? Okay.
And about 70% new oak in the Signature Series wines.
Yeah.
But keep in mind, I'm picking things that work well with the fruit. I'm not looking for things that are real aggressive a lot of times. So I'm looking for things that integrate well.
Yeah.
And then I'm taking a little longer in the process.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the three components that make it go together.
So I know I think Washington does a lot of varietals very well, better than any place in the world. Is there one varietal that you would suggest maybe not to try? Well, besides Pinot Noir.
Yeah, obviously some of the cool climate stuff really is not appropriate, right? So there are some places in Washington. I think there's some potential up in the Wenatchee area to find some microclimates for Pinot.
Okay.
Well,
the gorge has
some area.
Nice
The gorge has some. The gorge is really cool because you can just slide down the gorge until you find the weather you want, right?
Yeah.
So there is some advantages there in doing that. Let's see. Otherwise, I think for Red Mountain, obviously it's going to be focused on red grapes, right? The nice thing about Washington is that you've got such diverse climates, is that you can find a growing region to grow most things.
Okay.
If you spend the time to find the growing region. The problem with grape growing a lot of times is that growers will want to plant whatever's paying the best, right?
Yeah.
And not necessarily what their site will do the best.
Gotcha.
Why would you grow Cabernet in Wenatchee?
Right.
There's no reason. You could grow some spectacular Gewürztraminer though.
Yeah.
So you just have to plant the right things in the right places. And my feeling is you have to take a little longer term approach on it, from the growing side, is that you don't want to plant just what's hot and selling right now. You want to plant what your site does really well.
That's a good
point.
point.
Because if you do that, you've got long-term success. You're going to build a reputation for whatever that is, and you're going to do really well with it. And so, we grow Alvarino, but I don't grow it here on the estate. I grow it on another piece of property I have that's just a mile and a half away or so, but it's on a very steep east slope. And so you get out of all the hot afternoon sun, but yet I still have the heat units to ripen it early when I want to pick it.
Yeah.
And so it works out really well. I grow Sauv Blanc about 5 miles away from here. And so again, it's on a really steep east slope. It's 20% cooler than we are here. 20% heat units less than where we are here, just 5 miles away.
That's cool.
So, which is kind of neat.
Very cool.
Even on the estate here, we grow 4 varieties of whites on a small piece of property that slopes to the north and the east. The rest of the estate all slopes south and west. We've got one small part of the estate that slopes north and east, and we planted it white. So there's a little bit of the Dijon clones of Chardonnay, and then a little bit of Viognier, a little bit of Roussanne and Marsanne.
Okay. Cool.
And they do well. So
I could talk to you for hours, but I don't think my audience could
Well, hopefully I'm not putting them to sleep.
No, not at all. Not at all. Very interesting stuff. If you ever come to Eastern Washington, he's just up at the base of Red Mountain. It's a beautiful, beautiful estate. You need to stop by this place. You need to try Keith's wines. They're very reasonably priced. Even the Onyx, which I think is in the $50 range, retail.
So I think now here it's about 70.
Well, I think I sell it for 60 at the store.
Yep.
And if this same wine, and this is what I put in my blog, this same wine in Napa Valley would be over $100.
Yeah, that'd be probably in the 150 to 200 range in Napa.
Yeah. So you get to try a really super quality red blend, Bordeaux style red blend for half the price.
Yeah.
Less than half the price of Napa Valley.
Yeah, we try to price all the wines at a really good value. The idea is to over deliver all the time.
And you do.
So
he does. So this is a guy that produces great QPR wines, quality to price ratio, and you need to do yourself a favor and give them a try. Thank you.
Sounds great. Appreciate it, Stan. Thanks for having me.
You guys keep watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. You keep watching, and I'll keep helping you spend your wine dollars wisely.